Welcome, everybody, to Inside Boxing Daily on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. Inside Boxing Daily is brought to you by the Retired Boxers Foundation with Jackie Richardson and Alex Ramos. You can find them on Facebook and also by mybookie.ag. You can go to mybookie.ag, use the promo code TGT100, and get up to 100% cash back bonus on the first $300 that you deposit. You can also go to the Grueling Truth website, thegruelingtruth.com, and click on the banner at the top of that page. I am your co-host for Inside Boxing Daily, Mike Goodpaster. Right now, I'd like to welcome in my co-host, Jeremiah Preisser. How you doing, Jeremiah?
I'm always good, man. Whenever I get to talk boxing, sit behind a mic and do my best to entertain the guests. I'm happy.
All right, and we have a guest tonight. And I'd like to introduce somebody that I never agree with. But the thing that's amazing about never agreeing with him is we never call each other names either. William Pounds, how you doing, William?
Hey, how's it going, man?
All right, man. How you doing? Let's see. So, what was your take on Dominic Brazil and Deontay Wilder?
I kind of figured that it would maybe end in 4 rounds or less. I felt like, okay, this guy, he comes forward, he comes to fight, he doesn't move his head. And, I heard a lot of people say that he could take a pretty good punch, but it seemed like the first time he got hit, he got shook into the ropes. And, I give him credit because he did swing back and catch Wilder the 2 times off the ropes. And I was like, okay, this dude, I was thinking maybe he might come to lay down, but he threw a little bit of fire back, and then I was like, okay, oh man, he got Wilder to not be wild and to take a step back, because that second hit that clipped him, I don't know if it hit him in the back of the head or if Wilder just felt like it did, but he backed up. And I was like, man, normally he would have stayed there and swung, but I'm like, okay, this dude Brazil, he's not going to just go crazy on you with the wild stuff, so I'm trying to look what he's doing, and I felt like he would clinch and throw a few punches and break and maybe do that, but when he saw Wilder go for that 1-2, when he tried, I don't know if he tried to throw uppercut or if he tried to throw a counter left hook, but either or was not the right decision to make. And it just got him out of there real quick. And I don't know what he was thinking about talking about that the ref stopped it. I'm like, dude, you didn't beat the 10 count. Like, you still had a knee on the mat at 10. Like, you have to be up and on your feet clearly before 10. It's not
plus falling around like a drunk as you get up usually doesn't help.
Oh, yeah. That definitely helped. That would definitely hurt him in that case, falling around like that.
I think the big question here is how the hell did Dominic Brazil get to be the number one contender, the mandatory contender, because number one is not the mandatory contender anymore for some reason, because there's nothing on his record that earned that fight.
Yeah, I didn't think that he necessarily deserved it. And, you could make an argument for White, but at least as far as what I had been looking up and reading as far as the WBC, that if you win that silver title, you still have an eliminator. And I remember Sean Porter had to do the exact same thing. He had to fight another eliminator before he got to fight for the vacant belt at the time. And I was like, why is that? And I'm not sure if that happened at the exact same time that White thing happened. But if that's the case, like, why even go to the WBC silver? Why not just fight the fight that gets you there? And I remember WBC mandating that he fight Ortiz, and then mandating that he fight Fury. And I know he didn't take the Brazil fight, because Brazil was saying over a year ago there's a confusion about who's the number one, and he offered to fight him. And I'm like, White, you should have taken that fight, because certainly if you beat him, they would have definitely given you that spot. And if they didn't, then you definitely would have had a really strong case. But I think not fighting Brazil, not fighting Ortiz, it's like, do you want to just be given the spot, or do you want to earn it? Now, I know the WBO and IBF and everybody else, their rules might not be the same way as far as you win the silver title and you still have to do eliminator. And I think that's the problem with having those small belts. Is it like they don't count the same, but you still have to defend them, and then you have to do an eliminator to win them. And I'm like, I always found that to be kind of weird.
Well, my take on it,
But I mean,
William, is this, and I'll direct it at Jeremiah, so I don't forget about him again, because sometimes I do, because he's really quiet. But when I look at this, I think the problem is the fact that Deontay Wilder even owns a belt, or Anthony Joshua. I don't know why these guys just don't throw them in the trash and stop paying sanctioning fees and just fight the best guys. Jeremiah?
Well, if we didn't have so many to contend with, we wouldn't have to deal with this. I mean, we've gone over this in previous shows. I mean, if you only had one guy who was able to be the heavyweight champion, you would just have one guy and you'd have everybody else trying to be that guy. Instead, you get to hang on to your trinket, milk it for a little while, build up a fight, and the vast majority of the time, it doesn't turn out to be worth the asking price. I mean, look at Mayweather-Pacquiao. I mean, look at any pay-per-view that we've seen, for the last 20, 30 years. I mean, besides Golovkin and Canelo, which was a pretty good fight, I mean, it's just almost none of these are fight of the year type candidates. They by and large turn out to be duds. The undercards just aren't that good. And, that's one thing that doesn't get me all that riled up about, potential Joshua and Wilder fight. But I agree, man. It's just a bit odd, though, that, we're talking about Dillian White having to earn a shot. I mean, it would just be nice if we would just have a champion and he's just fighting the number one guy every year. I mean, I could deal with him fighting, maybe a top 10 guy for his other defense, or, maybe a top 20 guy if he has a third fight or something like that. But yeah, it just makes it all confusing. And again, when you're putting guys in mandatory positions, I think we've got to realize too that all of it's political. I mean, when Dominic Breazeale beat Eric Molina for a quote unquote title eliminator, I mean, did anybody really think that Eric Molina was worthy of that shot? I mean, Eric Molina's already gotten a couple of shots that he didn't deserve. I mean, I don't think he was ranked in the top 10 when Wilder or Joshua beat him. So for him to be put in the position, and again, this is what I was saying about Chris Arreola last night, where the WBC has always been biased towards Mexican fighters, and Eric Molina is just a modern rendition of Chris Arreola. That's why he's getting put in positions that he doesn't deserve. So, to me, when you have Dominic Breazeale and he's beating a guy like Eric Molina, and then he gets his quote-unquote mandatory shot 2 years after that, that fight was over, again, man, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Again, talking about earning it, I mean, who has Dominic Breazeale beat? I mean, Dillian White has beat Joseph Parker, a top 10 guy. He's, he beat Chisora twice. I mean, Chisora's kind of a fringe guy, but proved he still had a little bit when he beat Takam. I mean, Dillian White's resume is better than most of these guys, especially recently. So, to me, that's a fight that I would rather see, but it's all politics, and, the WBC's allowing Wilder to just kind of hang out on his side of the aisle, and all the other alphabet soup organizations are letting Joshua hanging out on his side of the aisle till they can all figure it out and finally get it done.
Yeah. I think, personally, 4 belts is a lot. Like, I think, obviously, there's going to be some corporate greed with sanction fees. So I think 2 is optimal, only because it still allows, I don't know which sanction body gets to survive or whatever, but I think if you have 2, then you have, really, when you have unification, you have one champion against the other, and then they fight each other, and that victor happens, but you don't have a mess like you do with 147 pounds. You don't have a situation where you have 4 different guys with each part of the belt. But I think if it's 2 belts, I mean, obviously the goal would be to have 1. But I think if you can have 2, then it's not really a negative thing, because it's like, okay, you can get the belt, this other guy has it, and it's just one fight for, like, I'll kind of look at it kind of somewhat the way, it's off topic, the way they have the wrestling, where they'll have a heavyweight belt for this one and then the heavyweight. And then usually every year or so, they'll have some big unification. And if you do it that way, then it's one fight. And it's not a big hassle. And usually, those sanctioned bodies, they'll be used to working with each other. When you have, I think the problem, too, is also with the weight things. Like, say if you're the IBF, you'll have certain rehydration clauses for weight with this one. and then maybe you'll have some blood testing with this one, and then another one. They'll have a second day weigh-in, and I think the problem when you have all those belts, you have all the different rules that go with them. And I think if you had two bodies and the rules were similar, I think it'd be a lot better. Not just for the heavyweights, but for, I think, every sanctioned body. The rules will be clear, and you won't have, I would say, sort of like contradictory situations where one side feels like they're not getting the respect they deserve. Like, I guess you could. It's weird that people are treating the Thurman and Pacquiao thing like it's a unification when those are really the same belts. Like, Pacquiao doesn't have the real version of the belt. He has the regular version. Thurman has the actual version of the belt, and I think that's part of the problem too. Not just the four main belts, but like you have baby belts that's under those too, and then you have to pay for those. And I'm like, man, that's a huge issue. And if you're not a top guy, like say you only make, let's say, $500,000 for a title fight, and then let's say the sanction fee is like $100,000, man, you just gave up a huge chunk of your money. And it's like, man, like I think that's the thing that hurts the most. And I couldn't imagine being undisputed right now, to be honest. Like, could you imagine having to pay the WBC and the WBA?
Well, yeah, that's 3% for all four of them.
Yeah, that is ridiculous. How much? And I think what fight was it? I think it was the Baltimore and Judah fight, and I think where he was supposed to pay for one of the belts, but like the sanction fee exceeded the entire purse that he was going to do, and so when he beat Judah, he didn't get that belt. And I was like, man, it's like how is it that your purse is lower than the sanction fee? Like that's why like I never knocked Mayweather for fighting Judah and Baltimore, because if Baltimore was able to afford the belt, then he could have just fought Baltimore, had both of the belts, and then maybe fought Margarito and then fought Oscar. But if you got to fight, if you're trying to collect the belts, and now you have to fight two guys instead of one, and you don't fight that often, it's like it's weird how things work. Like sometimes you'll have to pay a sanction fee, and something happens, or someone gets injured, or you get injured, and then it's delays, and it's a lot of stuff that needs to be cleaned up, like the Thurman always being hurt stuff, and like, man, like you never know. Like it's ridiculous because it's like in boxing, this is not a play around sport. Like you could get an eye injury or anything could happen. That's why I think it's always best to take those huge fights when you have a chance. I think the only exception would be if you have zero belief that you can beat your opponent, don't take the fight. That's like if you're like a Michael Spinks against Tyson, I think he should have never taken that fight. Because like in your heart, you didn't believe to win. But like I would say, even if you believe 60% that you can win, then take the fight.
Hey, remember this, William. In 1989, $20 million was a lot of money. And I don't think it was Spinks didn't believe he could win. I think it was Spinks' body was just shot. I mean, he came in with 2 knee wraps on his knees, and he was just an old light heavyweight. He didn't belong in there. Yeah. I mean, I think the Spinks in 1985 that fought Holmes the way he moved and fought that night, I don't think he necessarily beats Tyson, but I think that he gives a 1986 Tyson a little bit of trouble. But
yeah,
and I think Spinks. I don't think Spinks realized he was screwed until he got in the ring. Put it like that.
Yeah, I think that situation kind of sounds similar to when Cotto fought Sergio Martinez, where I think he had that injury to, I think he hurt his knee against Chavez or something, I think. And it kind of wasn't the same guy, but at the same time, you can't really make excuses. Like, I mean, like, us the fans, we do. But, like, the fighter, like, whenever you come in and you're a little older or you took an injury or something like that, it's like, I think the reason fighters don't make the excuse, I think because they always want to be a man and say that I lost. And I think if you're a person that comes in with excuses, then even if it's stuff that you did wrong, because obviously most fighters like you're never 100% healthy for anything. Like I don't think you're healthy in any sport.
That's kind of like if you're a football player and you're at week 3, even if you're playing Pee Wee and you're not hurt, you're not very good.
Oh yeah, you're not doing like even flag football. You could tweak something. Like I remember seeing a football player. I think he kicked a field goal and he jumped and then he landed awkwardly and hyperextended his knee. And I was like, you could hurt yourself doing literally anything. And I think that's the worst part sometimes with boxing is sometimes you don't know what injuries that another fighter, like obviously a eye injury is bad or neck or back or knee, but I mean you never know. Like I mean maybe Manny Pacquiao already had injured shoulders, but I'm like, what boxers? I can't imagine any boxer not having bad shoulders. Because you always using the shoulders, and then a lot of times when you're blocking, you're taking punches directly in your shoulders as opposed to like getting punched.
William, I'll tell you this. My problem with Manny Pacquiao is this: if he was injured, he should have put the fight off because I paid $100 to see that crap. I want to see a healthy Manny Pacquiao. I could have waited 3 or 4 more months. I mean, hell, we'd already waited 75 years. When we look at this heavyweight division, my question is this. I'll let Jeremiah go first. I already know his thoughts on it because we talked about it a little bit before. But how disturbing was it for you to see Deontay Wilder on that list with Joe Louis and all those guys with 9 title defenses, even though he's not the champion?
Yeah, I know that's one of the problems with boxing as well. As we talked about, all the titles that are and just how convoluted it makes everything. I mean, to me, it doesn't even make sense to call a guy a world champion if you have more than one.
Yeah.
It just seems a bit odd that, like, how can you make the same claim that somebody else is making? He mentioned the welterweights. It's like, okay, well, you have 3 other guys making the same claim as you. And I think people need to make the distinctions between being an alphabet soup organization champion, right? You are the champion of the WBC or the IBF or the WBA, et cetera, et cetera. You're the champion of that organization. You're not the world's champion.
That's like being the AFC North champion, but going around saying you won the world title.
Exactly. Well, and not only that, I mean, being the AFC North champion probably has a bit more prestige to it because at least there's a clear format, and you've got to fight the best, or you've got to play the best guys in your division, multiple times throughout the season. So there's a lot more clarity there. But we see, just last weekend where Billy Joe Saunders is able to fight, Shifat Isufu, who was ranked 48th by BoxRec, and he was able to fight for a quote-unquote world championship. I mean, and we continuously get that stuff. That's what I was talking about with Eric Molina and Chris Arreola, with their, the WBC situations. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to call a guy a world champion when you're getting political favors, or it's, again, a lot of this is just elbow rubbing and politics. I mean, Billy Joe Saunders didn't get that shot with Isufu because he had beat anybody at 168. He had beaten nobody at 168. Nobody had him ranked. Nobody had Isufu ranked. So, how exactly does he get that shot? Well, it's because Frank Warren and the WBO are butt buddies. I mean, they've been playing grab ass for, decades now. I mean, part of the reason that, the WBO was able to make headway into the boxing mainstream is because of, Frank Warren and Bob Arum, who obviously has a stranglehold on that organization as well. So, to call, Deontay Wilder or Anthony Joshua, the world's heavyweight champion, it just doesn't make any sense to me. So this is the problem with all these statistics. You're comparing guys like Joe Louis, who was the champion for the entirety of his career, Muhammad Ali, who was the champion every time he held the belt, his 2 reigns, or Jack Dempsey, or James Corbett, or any number of these guys who were the man their entire reign. You're comparing it to alphabet trinket defenses. I mean, you see it often, not only with the heavyweights, but you see with Bernard Hopkins and his 19 title defenses, being compared to Carlos Monzon and Marvin Hagler. I even saw bad left hook put a list together of the most lightweight championship defenses ever, and they had Artur Gregorian over Roberto Duran and Joe Gons and people like that. I mean, to me, it just doesn't make any sense, and I think we need to learn to make the distinction there, or else, again, we just risk all this revisionism, and I just think
it's the history of the sport then.
Exactly. It's just mudding the waters even further.
Yeah. One thing I will say in Hopkins' defense is he was the undisputed champ, so he did get all the belts.
But when did he win that? He didn't have 19 defenses. He didn't become the undisputed champion until he beat Trinidad.
Oh no, I'm saying he wasn't undisputed at for all of those title defenses. But I will say that because he was undisputed, I wouldn't critique it the same way as if he just had one belt. Like, obviously,
we're critiquing the record, though. To say that he has the record for most title defenses is not accurate.
Well, here's the other thing, too. Like, how do we know that any of the other guys would have had the same title defenses if they had 3 or 4 belts? Because, I mean, obviously, with one belt, there's only one way to prove that. But I think if you have 2 or 3 belts, and let's just say there's – no, I'm saying say you have Joe Louis in the 80s, and let's just say they're the 3 belts like they had then. Like, and let's just say one sanction, let's just say the WBA just didn't like him and they weren't going to give him a title shot. They were going to do everything they could to keep him from contention. But let's just say he had the exact same success that he had, but he never really got a shot at the WBA. Like, will we hold that against him?
Do we hold it against Larry Holmes? I mean, Larry Holmes was the WBC champion, and most people considered him the man after he'd beaten Norton, and then especially after he beat Ali, who was the man who beat the man, which was Leon Spinks. So you had, from 1980 to 1985, a WBA heavyweight champion, but nobody for 1 second thought that Mike Weaver or Tim Witherspoon or any of those guys were the actual heavyweight champion. Everybody knew who the best man was.
Right. I do get what William's saying, though. Is he saying, well, what if you put Joe Louis in modern context, right? Like, what would it take for Marvin Hagler if he had to, if there were 4 trinkets, what exactly would it take for him to be the man? Would he have the same kind of, defense total and whatnot? I mean, I understand the point, but that's part of my problem altogether is that the fact that there are so many alphabet soup organizations, it's just all making it confusing. I mean, you shouldn't sound like you're talking string theory to, somebody who doesn't know the sport when they're like, hey, what's going on? I mean, again, I use this example a lot, but when Jim Lampley had, I think it was, what was her name, Michelle Beadle or something like that on ESPN, he had her on the Fight Game, and he asked, why don't you watch boxing? And she said, frankly, it's just too confusing. I don't know who the champion is. I don't know when the champions are fighting. A lot of the best guys are not fighting the best guys in a timely fashion. So, again, I understand your point, William, but, again, that's my problem altogether is just the fact that we have to deal with all this stuff. It does muddy the waters. I mean, sure, I think there's a possibility if there's only one title to go to, maybe Bernard Hopkins gets it significantly sooner, maybe, but we would also have to change things around to have a governing body who can enforce these kinds of things because a lot of these guys in history have been screwed because they've had to play the waiting game.
Well, how about this, William? We talked about this before we came there. You talked about Muhammad Ali and what he did after George Foreman, after he won the title. But with one title, after he lost to Joe Frazier, he beat George Chuvalo, Jerry Quarry, Floyd Patterson, Bob Foster, Joe Bugner, fought Ken Norton twice, split with him. Then he beats Joe Frazier in the second fight, and then he got a shot at George Foreman. After Foreman and he's the champion, he fights Chuck Webner, who's a fringe top 10 guy. He shouldn't have been against Ali. But then he fights Ron Lyle, who was 30-2 and ranked number 3. He fights Joe Bugner, who's 51-6 and ranked number 6. And then he defends his title against Joe Frazier. So if you only have, this is the thing, Joe Louis's resume probably wouldn't look as good if you split up the titles, because not everybody would have had to fight Joe Louis. You could have got around it. You could have fought Big John Tate instead of Joe Louis and then ignored Joe Louis.
No, that's definitely true. And then, what was it? Also, the other question I have too is pertaining to a lot of guys who become lineal. Now, obviously, you're supposed to beat the guy who is the man, but okay, if we're going all the way back to when Lennox Lewis was the man, like who beat Lennox Lewis to even be considered the man? Because Vitaly didn't beat him, and Vlad definitely wouldn't have beaten him. So when he retired, I always had this question: what made Vlad the lineal champ? Because I don't believe for a second he would have ever beaten Vitaly.
Well, I think it's because I don't think anybody considered Vlad the champ, Jeremiah, until Vitaly retired.
Well, I mean, what ended up happening, if I remember correctly, again, I was a pretty early fan at this stage, but from what I remember is that, Vladimir and Vitaly were pretty much 1 and 2 whenever Vitaly was healthy. The problem with Vitaly is he often was not. So So to kind of accommodate Vladimir being the more consistent of the bunch, everybody let him fight what was the number 3 guy in Ruslan Chagayev to pick up a linear championship. So
yeah, that is right.
Yes, so there's two distinctions here. I mean, and I think we should acknowledge them. There are lineal and there's linear. So linear is when the line is broken and then it's picking back up, and lineal is a succession of lines. So everybody made an accommodation to Vladimir to fight Ruslan Chagayev, who was number 3, to pick up the new championship and carry the line. I should note, even some people don't like that thought, but again, back then, it seemed like just about everybody was in agreement. I mean, the Ring magazine especially was kind of at the forefront of that. But it should be acknowledged, too, that even if you don't acknowledge that, Vladimir did end up beating the number 2 guy in Alexander Povetkin. So either way, he would have been the man.
Yeah, he pretty much cleaned out the division.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. It's just you had a situation where there were 2 champions, and you knew, obviously, that they were never going to fight. But, I mean, like, to me, Vlad would have had very little chance of beating his brother. I mean, granted, we were never going to find that out, but it always felt like the lineal championship or that award was given to the brother that was the champion that was longer, who had a longer title reign, but in practicality, he was really the lesser brother. He was the guy that had been stopped all these other times. And, yeah, he had a long reign, but injuries aside, I'm like, Vitaly had a much more dominant career as far as the time frame that he fought, because he wasn't knocked down by anybody. He had the 2 injuries that resulted in losses. And really, nobody was going the distance with him. And, I mean, obviously, with Vlad getting the lineal title, then Tyson Fury beats him, and he ends up going through what he goes through, and then he says he's the lineal champ. But it's like, it's weird because it's like nobody really beat Lewis to become that guy. I mean, obviously, if the guy retires, then it's not really anything you can do about it.
Well, it's kind of like when Marciano retired and they had Patterson fight more because they were 1 and 2.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it always made sense, but it always felt like in the real world, you would always prefer the champion to lose, preferably by knockout to the new upstart. That way, it's an official passing of the torch. Like I would say, like obviously, even in other sports like football, like you would prefer Tom Brady to make the Super Bowl and lose to the next guy that's going to like take the league over. Obviously, that doesn't happen most of the time in any sport, but like in boxing, you would prefer that to happen. Like the way things ended with Tyson, the way things ended with Ray Leonard, the way things ended with just about everybody. Like almost everybody's had a
everybody except for Rocky Marciano. And,
well, yeah. When you think about it, yes.
Marciano, Mayweather.
Luckily for us, Marciano was the only smart one, or we'd have had a bunch of messes through there.
Yeah, most of the times we do get something like that, at least at heavyweight, right? I mean, Sullivan lost to Corbett lost to Fitzsimmons lost to Jeffries, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, there's been a few breaking the lines, and I definitely see where you're going. I mean, because there's even nowadays, because of how convoluted things are. I mean, there's even questions with the linear/lineal championship. And again, this is why I don't live and die with any of this stuff, because there's holes in all of it. I mean, this is why I think we need a single governing body, which makes the best fight the best in a regular. And I'm not talking about a league necessarily
But that's
like
never going to happen, and you know it's not.
I
Unless
don't know.
fans stop buying into this and fighters stop paying their freaking money for it. Because the sad thing is, I wrote the article on Alex Ramos today, and it's a perfect example. When you talk about this is the one sport where when everybody's done, there's very few Floyd Mayweathers and Larry Holmes that seem like they still have money in their faculties, a few years later.
Oh,
You know?
very few.
And the thing that's sad is maybe I mean, how much does a promoter and a trainer and all that take out of a purse? Because we had this conversation the other day, William, and it's like, I know a few different NFL agents. They take like 3%, 5% at most. And in boxing, these guys are losing half their purse at least.
Yeah, I think, what's the name? Aiden Sanchez was getting 10% of Triple G's purse.
Yeah, I could see
And
why Triple G fired him. I ain't giving him 10%.
Yeah, and then include a manager and a promoter.
Yeah,
and his seconds.
Yeah, that's a joke.
And his cut man.
Taking any to risk. Abel Sanchez is not going to die while Triple G fights in the ring, and Triple G could.
Yeah.
So it's a joke. So my question to you is, how good is this heavyweight division?
Well, I think we have to have everybody fight each other and find out. Because I believe, like, okay, let's say we have the exact same situation in the 70s where there's 4 belts. And let's just say Frazier and Ali haven't fought. Foreman has 1 belt, but he hasn't
I'll give you
fought.
this, though. Frazier and Ali demanded to fight each other. There were 2 belts because remember when Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, right in that time where he got screwed over by the United States government, they stripped him of his title. New York State Athletic Commission recognized Joe Frazier, who beats Jimmy Ellis. So there was 2 separate titles there, and nothing was getting done there. And if you remember the story, Muhammad Ali went to the place where Joe Frazier trained, and they basically got the fight done.
Oh, yeah, I agree, too. That's the other reason that I use the wrestling analogy of having 2 belts, because it's a lot easier to sort out 2 belts. Because if Ali was okay, he had everything with the award, everything, okay, he stripped of the belt. A lot of people consider him the champ, but Frazier's the active guy, they consider him the champ. If you have 2 situations like that, it's just 1 fight. And it's easier. It's less sanctioned bodies. It's less people getting in the way.
Yeah, but with just 1, it's even easier.
Oh, obviously 1 is it. I'm just saying as far as, like, keeping the greed of these things, because obviously they want to get their money. They're like, there's a certain level of greed and corruption. It's like, man, like, you got to let this happen. Like, it's like the same way people had to deal with Don King and his BS to get their fights and stuff like that. And it was, I mean, obviously he was robbing people, but like with him, you were getting the best fights. So, I mean, like, obviously I'm not condoning that corruption, but I mean, to a certain extent, it's like, okay, this is a bad thing. I think it's just like in the NFL where they don't blow a whistle, or basketball where sometimes you get more fouls at home than like, it's always certain levels of bias and BS that's there with sports. Like, I think sometimes that always takes away from the purity of whatever.
Well, because they're
sport it is.
basically big corporations that own every sports entity.
Now, the bad thing about 1 belt is if you have that kind of body, you can screw the fighters over the way the UFC does. Like, that's why I like the actual sport, but I hate that Dana White basically admitted that he just pays the fighters what he wants to pay them because it keeps them hungry. It keeps them in a state where it's like, man, I got to take this fight. And for a fan, that's obviously a beautiful thing, but like, when you're in there getting punched in the face, when you're getting elbowed, when you're doing all of this, and you're the person risking your life and your health, and you're not getting paid or work, I think that's the only good thing about the system now, is you do get paid. But I think the problem is the fans, we don't get to fight. That's why I think 2 belts, I think the fighters can still get paid, And I think ultimately you'll still get the fights you want. I think 3 is too many belts, and I think 1 is too many because you can have a monopoly. And if you have one sanctioned body, now they can institute all those little weight
Yeah,
issues.
but
That the
how about
IBF
this?
be
Right
doing.
now, if there's just 2, and
Uh-huh.
there kind of are, because, I mean, there's a lineal claim, whatever, with Tyson Fury, but to me, he was gone more than 2 years, so he loses that claim there. Um,
hmm
so if you've got Joshua and Wilder, they're still
hmm
not fighting. And
That's
you've
the
got,
issue.
and if you put in Fury and Joshua still aren't fighting. Wilder and Fury aren't
Yeah.
fighting now, and I still think that the only reason that PBC allowed Wilder to fight Fury is they thought Fury was damaged goods because he'd been gone so long. I think if Fury would have never left, these 3 guys would have fought the entire time and never even stepped in the ring with each other.
Yeah, that could have definitely have happened, and I think that's part of the sad thing too. Is like a lot of times with fighters before they have their first loss, they'll be so precious over it. But a lot of times when you see a fighter get one loss, it's almost like they don't care about the loss, and they're willing to take fights. And I mean, it's almost like you would rather have every fighter enter with one loss automatically. That way, it's not such a big deal. Because I mean, it's awesome to go
How about
undefeated, but
this,
you're
William?
never
This
gonna.
is a discussion I want to have with you because I know just from previous shows you really like Floyd Mayweather. Me and Jeremiah had
Mhm.
this discussion once. I think that if Castillo wins that decision against Mayweather and gives him a loss, Mayweather's career would have
Mhm.
been even greater because I don't think he would have worried so much about protecting the undefeated record.
I think it could have. I think the only thing that would have been harder was getting Oscar would have been harder because he already had to jump through hoops, not getting the pay-per-view money, and then having to jump up in weight.
Yeah, but how
I
about
mean,
this?
it's
If he
more.
loses, maybe Oscar, is easier to deal with. Because you have to take short money on it, but you still get the Oscar fight, which is the fight that blew him up.
That's true. Now, I do think I will say there is an element of his personality and the hatred, and the fact that there were so many racist fans that paid strictly to see him lose. I think those fans, if he already has a loss, it's not as compelling. Because if, like, okay, let's just say I'm back in when Marciano fought. Let's just say I don't like Marciano at all. And let's just say the pay-per-view model is the exact same way. I'm like, I don't like this guy, but I'm willing to pay the equivalent of what $100 was every single time he fights just to see him fight. Like, no matter who it is, okay, let's see the stars. I think he's going to beat Marciano. And then I'm dead wrong, and he knocks him out. And then I think Joe Louis is going to beat him. And then I think Jersey Joe is going to beat him. And I keep paying it. But if he has a loss, let's just say in his 25th fight, like, I would still pay to see him fight, like if I really didn't like him. But if he's unbeaten and I keep paying, it's almost like you're playing the lottery. And you're like, man, I'm about to hit this Mega Millions. And to a lot of people, that's what it was. Because, I mean, people were betting to see if it would go the distance, if he would win by knockout. And, like, I don't know all the way how gambling stuff worked. But I'm pretty sure whoever bet on Mayweather to beat Patton by KO, since he doesn't get a lot of those, they probably got the over as far as money, as far as betting and stuff like that.
Joe Cortez
But I
made
mean,
a
I
lot of
think,
money on that fight, I think, didn't he, Jeremiah?
Yeah, he did.
yeah.
Yeah, well,
But
it's
I think he
go,
would have been a two-time lightweight champ, whereas he only won it once. I think Wilder said something about like when you lose, you have a chance to be a multiple champ. The same way Holyfield, he's a four-time champ because he lost three or
Hey,
four times.
Muhammad Ali, the biggest hit accomplishment for him, I think, was winning the title for the 3rd time at 36 against Spinks.
I found
Oh,
7
yeah.
on the websites.
Because nobody had
yeah,
ever
that-
done
that-
that before.
The first 3.
Oh, yeah, that boosted him so much. And you know what was crazy, too? I think the fact that when Ali and Frazier fought, like, regardless of all the fact that, like, he lost those years fighting, I always considered it, regardless of whether, because some people didn't feel like Frazier was the real champ, and they didn't, and technically Ali didn't really have a belt then, but I always looked at it as that was the first time Ali really lost the belt. Like, even if he had the belts legit and the whole...
It was. He was the real champion, and I think most people thought that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So when he lost, I felt like he lost the belts, and then he really had to gain it. I mean, actually, on paper, he didn't have belts yet, but at the same token, it was like, man, I actually lost something. And I think Ali, he really had to climb back up and regain it. And I think that's the thing that, because it's weird the way the fights went, because obviously they were both a champ, or considered technically a champ, and then Ali lost that fight, and then the second fight, they both had already lost, so it wasn't as meaningful as far as a title shot, but it was Ali rebounding, and then the third fight, Ali was a champ, and a lot of people thought Preisser was done, but he showed them that he definitely wasn't. And I think just the different dynamics of that, because obviously most people consider the first and the third the best. Like, I always thought the first one was the best, but the weight of the third one, I think, was the biggest. And I think the fact that who was the champion at each time, it almost felt like it was like a symbolic weight of who was supposed to be the man at the time. Because I think by the time the third fight happened, it's like they both had already taken...
Well, Ali was a huge favorite in the third fight.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, they both had taken 2 losses, so that fear of, oh, if I lose it, like, it wasn't there. They weren't even thinking about it.
See, I don't think guys like that ever thought about it, though. And I think what we see today, Jeremiah, is you watch Canelo and Jacobs. I mean, come on. I mean, it's just like Sugar Ray Leonard's going to try to knock your ass out even if he's won the first 11 rounds because he wants to leave an impression and he wants to be dominant. We don't see that with fighters anymore.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of to your point. You guys talk about Floyd Mayweather. There is I think William was addressing something that was sort of interesting too, where he was saying, well, if Mayweather doesn't have the shiny zero, maybe not as many people tune in to watch him fight. But on the flip side, and I think to your point, well, if he takes a loss early in his career, maybe he's just fighting the best more consistently, and we know that in itself is a good way to generate a lot of revenue. I mean, in fact, that's what we wish would happen far more. I mean, we wish the best of the best would fight each other, again, in a timely fashion. We wouldn't have to sit here and wait for a lunar eclipse before we finally got it. But, yeah, I mean, to the point about the UFC, it's like they have that going for them where it's more like you have in old boxing where, guys take a loss and so what? You just pick up the pieces and you keep going. I mean, I remember when the UFC, and again, I'm a casual fan when it comes to mixed martial arts. I really don't follow the sport. I think the last fight I saw was, George St. Pierre's last fight. I don't know. No.
Last one I saw was when Ronda Rousey fought, and she was like the Floyd Mayweather. I was paid to see her because I want to see her get her ass knocked out. But go ahead.
Yeah, and she did.
But no,
yeah. So Robbie Lawler was their welterweight champion not that long ago. I think maybe it was 3 years ago, and he had like 11 losses going in. I mean, you couldn't envision that today. Unless they were, Mexican or so. They had come up the hard way, they had just accumulated a lot of losses early in their career. But, yeah, I mean, you just don't see that. Everybody's so hell-bent on preserving their shiny zero. And, there were times when, like, Keith Thurman, for instance, was like, oh, well, I don't care if my O goes. It's all good. And now he just kind of seems like he's become more of a product of the system. I still like Thurman, but, he just doesn't.
He's picked up depression just like Tyson Fury too. That was always impressive.
Yeah, right. I know, but no, but to me, I mean, this is the thing. Okay, so you have people who say, well, boxers should be paid every single penny, like maximize every penny every time that they fight, and then my problem with that, and again, it's not as if I wanted to value boxers per se, but how is this thing ever going to work if all of the emphasis is on a fighter's payday and not necessarily our value as fans? I mean, I think that's what you're getting here is where even Al Bernstein said it, where it's boxing is laissez-faire capitalism run amok where, yeah, these guys are getting huge paydays, but in terms of fan value, we're just getting less and less product all the time. I mean, when Vladimir Klitschko and Anthony Joshua can be fight of the year, I don't think we're doing that well in the sport itself, because that was not. I mean, hell, the few fights we've watched on the heavyweights lately, like Moore and Burt Cooper, Holyfield and Cooper, even Buddy Bear versus Joe Lewis. I mean,
those were fights where what we get now is Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder stare at each other and land 8 to 9 punches around.
Yeah, it's like Anthony Joshua and Vladimir Klitschko threw less punches overall than a 246-pound Bow in the second Holyfield fight. I mean, it's just we need some sort of compromise where, we're getting fan value and we're getting, a culture that accepts losses and doesn't really care that much. I mean, nobody really cared when Thomas Hearns got knocked out in the 14th round against Sugar Ray Leonard. Nobody gave a crap. No. So what? He was still a damn good fighter. Yeah, so I mean, the culture needs a change, and we need to find a balance there where, guys aren't getting screwed out of paydays. I understand that the UFC doesn't pay guys boxing salaries, and I'm not one to. Again, I don't know much about the UFC or Dana White or anything.
Sports that's only been around for 20, 25 years, something like that. So boxing's been around forever, and it's just like when George Foreman said that this could be the biggest fight in history. It can't. It just can't. I mean, as we talked about before, Ali Spinks 2 billion, was it 2 billion people, Jeremiah?
Watched 2 billion people. 2 billion people, and you had almost 63,500 packed into the Superdome there in New Orleans. I mean, you can't get that. You can't get those numbers. I mean, if they put on Wilder and Joshua now, what pay-per-view buys are you going to get? Maybe 1 million? I mean, 1 million would be good for them.
Because they're going to overcharge you $100 for the damn thing now.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and I'm not convinced that this is necessarily even a big. I don't even necessarily think that it's as big as Joshua and Klitschko. I mean, Klitschko had a huge following in Germany. He was obviously huge in the Ukraine and a lot of parts of Europe. So I'm just not even sure. But that's the thing, is we're using. And when we use the term big, again, I said this last night, I believe.
We're talking like Ali Foreman. Ali Foreman, that's the perfect question there, Jeremiah. Can Ali and Foreman, or could, Joshua and Wilder go to the middle of Africa and sell a fight?
No, I mean, I don't think they could go there. I don't think they could go to the Manila, Philippines. I mean, I do think in Africa there would be some appeal if he fought Joshua, because Joshua is from, I believe his parents are from Nigeria. So maybe if you do it there, you might be able to garner some sort of following. But it doesn't have that sort of appeal. Again, when we're using the term big, we're not just talking about financials, because that's not all it entails. I mean, we're talking about these characters and their charisma and, their global appeal and, the hype surrounding it. I mean, Ali Spinks 2, almost half of every person in the United States was watching that fight. I think it was 46.7% of all homes were watching that. So this was, in terms of percentage, that's bigger than I think the numbers we get nowadays in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I don't think this fight could even crack a top 10 of biggest heavyweight fights of all time.
No, I don't think so.
Now, I think here's the issue, too, is part of it, I think, is the sport isn't nearly as big as it was. Like, basketball is bigger now, football is bigger, baseball is bigger. UFC
They're not. They're not bigger now. Because the 1975 World Series, 7th game, 75 million people watched it. Last year, 15 million people watched the World Series. 1984, the highest-rated NBA Finals game is still Magic versus Larry when Bird beat Magic in Game 7 of the Finals. Every one of these sports has dropped off except for football. And to give you an example is, and this isn't that long ago, at least it's not to me because I'm old, but when, 1992, when George Foreman fought Evander Holyfield, it was the first TVKO pay-per-view fight that HBO did. It was only available in 16 million homes. 1.6 million people bought that fight. That's a buy rate of 8% of everybody that had that pay-per-view. When you compare it to Pacquiao Mayweather was like 2%. And the problem is this. The reason sports aren't as big now is LeBron's big. When LeBron's on, you get ratings. But when he's not on, you don't. In the mid 80s, well, hell, if the finals didn't have Larry Bird, it had Magic Johnson. You always had a superstar in that event, and those guys were larger than life. Muhammad Ali was larger than life. Sugar Ray Leonard was larger than life. Mike Tyson, larger than life. George Foreman, larger than life. So what we need is a guy with that kind of talent that can box, that can speak well. And, I mean, I don't think Deontay Wilder is an asshole. I don't think he wants to kill anybody. But it doesn't really excite people because I think this. With Mike Tyson, most people thought, yeah, this dude probably does want to kill somebody. With Deontay Wilder, it just looks like he's trying to sell tickets. And then you got Anthony Joshua on the other side who looks like he does exactly what he's told to do. He speaks the way he's told to speak, and he says what he's told to say. And those kind of guys don't sell. Tyson Fury, you know, he can sell a fight with his mouth, but he's boring as shit to watch him fight. Yeah, so
No,
if you could give Tyson Fury's skills and his mouth to Deontay Wilder, you'd have somebody that was larger than life. Unfortunately, that can't happen.
Now, the one thing I did want to, we'll be taking it back a lot because y'all said a whole lot. I will say the one thing about Wilder, though, is I would say every fight he comes in there with intention and not it's.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't. He didn't against Fury, or he would have thrown more punches. He didn't against Ortiz. He comes in with that intention against people that aren't any good.
Well, here's the thing, though. You have to realize those guys are really good. They can make you pay. So you can't come in reckless and just.
I didn't say reckless. I said aggressive. And Deontay Wilder, until Ortiz got tired, did not come in at all, hardly. There was very little that went on the first 3 or 4 rounds of that fight.
Oh, that's true. I mean, the thing with that fight is, this is a southpaw Cuban guy. This guy definitely has more skills.
Yeah, who's not very good. He's never done anything. He beat Bryant Jennings.
Now, here's the thing, too, though. When we say the words, he's not, he has skills, because by that standard, I would say Shavers is good. To me, technically,
this is the thing, though. The difference is this. Ernie Shavers knocked out some legitimately really good fighters, and I'll tell you, Larry Holmes, the shot he hit Holmes with in that second fight was bigger than the shot Wilder hit Fury with. I thought he killed Larry Holmes when Holmes went down.
I don't know if it was big. Well, I would say that shot, yeah, but I would say his biggest shots, I don't know. I would say if you compare it just to the Fury shot, because I don't think he hit him the left hook. I don't think he hit him clean because he was falling back. But
that is Tyson Fury, and Tyson Fury doesn't take a punch very well.
I mean, he didn't get that one in the 12th round. He didn't really get hit clean. It's not as clean as I've seen.
Yeah, but this is a Tyson Fury that got dropped by a cruiserweight, Steve Cunningham.
Well, here's the issue too. You can just get hit off balance or just out of position and get dropped. It's not necessarily that you can just take a hit. Now, obviously, the genetics does play a role, but if your feet are just unbalanced the wrong way, or a number of things can happen, and you could easily get knocked off balance. So, I don't think it's always the situation where, okay, this guy can take a punch. Because obviously George Foreman can take a punch, but he's been dropped a few times, and most have been off balance.
He was never dropped when he came back. He was dropped out of exhaustion in Africa, and he was dropped out of exhaustion in Puerto Rico.
Yeah. But, isn't stamina part of that's definitely a part of
Yeah, and that's why when you look at George Foreman, though, this is the thing. Jimmy Young was a damn good boxer. I think Jimmy Young would tear the heavyweights up today. The Jimmy Young from 1976-77, because after that, I think the politics of boxing, especially after he got screwed out of the Ken Norton decision, kind of broke him down. And Ernie Shavers, I don't think was a very good heavyweight, but when I look at it, he knocked out a couple guys that were good, but the guys that were better, like Ron Lyle, Jerry Quarry, those guys whipped his ass and knocked him out. I'll give you that. And when he fought Larry Holmes twice, They fought a total of 23 rounds, and he landed that one punch, knocked Holmes down once. Holmes won every other round, and hell, Holmes won the rest of the round he got knocked down in, and almost stopped Shavers in that round.
Yeah, I think he stopped him in that fight. He stopped him late.
He stopped him in the 11th round.
No. Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, I was guessing 10 or 11.
Yeah, so Ernie Shavers was just a guy. He was dangerous. He had a big punch. If you had to compare him, light heavyweight Darnell Boone would be a good example, I think, Jeremiah.
Oh. Yeah, I think that'd be right. You know, like a real big puncher like that, but you know, somebody who could.
Yeah, you can't play with his ass because he.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, he could crack you.
Yeah, here's the other thing too. Like, as much as they wanted to say the Klitschko's were boring and all that, well, not necessarily Vlad, but Vitaly in his prime, he threw 700, 800 punches around. Well, not around.
You'll never hear us say Vitaly was boring. I don't even think Vladimir was boring. I just think the guys Vladimir fought weren't talented enough to do anything about what he was doing, and it was safer to do it that way.
Yeah, they weren't as good. But I was like, I used to see fights where I'm like, Vitaly is getting in there trying to really murder you. I'm like, man, 58 punches thrown this round.
Oh, dude, the beating he put on Danny Williams was badass.
Yeah, and that was right after Danny Williams beat Tyson. And I was like, I always wondered, like, could Tyson have won that fight against Williams and fought him? And I was always pissed that Tyson wasn't able to get past him.
Vitaly Klitschko might have killed Mike Tyson that night.
Yeah, like that was the thing that always bothered me. Just like, man, like I just want to see one really, really good guy against him. Because obviously the Bird fight, he ended up hurting the shoulder and probably could have continued, but didn't. And then the Lewis fight, he had that really disgusting cut. And then he chased Lewis for about 4 years. Like, man, let's run it back. Like every time he would be like, Lennox Lewis high, and I'm like, man, like Lennox Lewis is 38. That dude's not about to run it back with you. And I think the thing that sucked is, like, he was, like, obviously he couldn't fight his brother. And then he wasn't able to get the rematch with Lewis. And it's like you're stuck in a spot where you really can't necessarily test yourself. And up until the time he was 38, like, only one person with the distance. So he was beating the hell out of everybody. I'm like, man, he's just battering dudes. And then I think I was watching the Briggs fight, and he didn't stop him. But, man, he really pummeled Briggs. And I was like, man, like...
He beat him so bad, Briggs chased his brother around for the next decade.
Yeah, I was like, man, I'm not about to fight you. My big brother just beat you. Like, unless I beat you in more dominant fashion, it's like, I won't say there's no point in it, but by the same token, it's like, man, like, I don't really get too much to gain from that necessarily. And I think Vlad, like, later when he would jab and just grab people sometimes, obviously that's an important tactic. Like, people act like Thomas Hearns wouldn't throw a jab and then have his hand to lead where he wanted your hand to go, or they act like Ali wouldn't hold behind the head, or Mayweather wouldn't use forearms, or Lewis wouldn't throw a jab and then move your hand and hit. Like, I think everybody had some trait that you can nitpick. Like, man, I don't like this. This stretches.
Well, I think the problem between Vitaly and Vladimir, I don't know why this is, Jeremiah, but when you look at him, Jeremiah, I mean, damn near the best win on Vitaly's record after he won the title is probably Corey Sanders or Sam Peter. But when you look at Vladimir got to fight the Shigayevs, the Abramovs, and the Povetkins, who were good fighters.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, that's how it was. I mean, Vitaly Sanders, actually, at the time, when Vitaly beat him, I think he was number 2 in the division. I could be mistaken. In fact,
that is where he became the heavyweight champion, Vitaly.
Right, yeah, exactly. I think he was number 1, and I think Sanders was number 2 at the time, and the ring had him as a champion for maybe a year. I can't remember that. That one's kind of fuzzy to me, but I do remember that they were highly ranked.
What happened was this, from what I remember, he beat Sanders. He was named a champion. He fought Danny Williams, like, I think in December of 2004. But then the reason that the title changed hands was the fact that he was injured. He didn't fight from the start of 2005 to almost the end of 2008. That's how Vladimir became the champion.
That 4 year.
Yeah,
deal.
because
think
I
he
forgot about
retired
that
from
too,
the
and I just got on BoxRec and I was looking at his record and I saw that 4 year span and it just kind of dawned on me. That's what we were talking about. We couldn't remember it, but that
Yeah.
is how Vladimir became the champion by winning the fight against Chigayev because Vitaly was considered a man when he beat Sanders. He was the man after he beat Williams, and then you had the 4 years off.
Well, yeah, and I think I ended up liking both guys. I mean, Vladimir, I'm in agreement with William there. Like, I liked Vitaly better. I thought he was a better fighter. In fact, I think if Vitaly did not suffer from injuries and Vladimir did not exist, he would have had a longer and better reign than Vladimir did. But they were both, efficient operators, and they each had their various skill sets. And Vitaly was significantly more fun to follow, just because he would fight a bit more and actually throw his hands. But I think if you put Vitaly in with Vladimir's opponents, I think he's getting the job done. I'm not saying he doesn't have the one punch power that Vladimir had, but I think he's beating the same guys that Vitaly did.
He was more durable.
He was.
He had the chin.
Well, I mean, he was
more too.
Yeah, because how about this? Corey Sanders hit harder than Deontay Wilder, I think.
Well, I can tell you that Corey Sanders hit pretty damn hard. I mean, I remember one, and again, I've brought this up on previous shows.
He was a damn good boxer too.
Yeah, he was. He was like so many other guys that just fall through the cracks in the heavyweight division where they're not maximizing their potential. Whether
he was
it's
his
because
own worst enemy.
Yeah, exactly. Like so many guys we've seen in the heavyweight division before. I mean, guys who just sometimes they're on, sometimes they're off. Sometimes it's the food, sometimes it's the drugs, sometimes it's the pussy. Yeah, it's you know what I mean. It's one thing or another. It seems like with the heavyweights, and that's why you got to give credit to the guys who actually maintained. And had that longevity. That's why I do have a lot of respect for Vladimir, because he never showed up flabby or I mean, he was a dedicated professional, and he was a good ambassador to the sport. But yeah, Corey Sanders was a good fighter. I mean, quick southpaw, hit hard. I mean, he cracked Hasim Rockman with that left uppercut there, and I think until he got starched by Lennox Lewis in the rematch, he said that was the hardest that he ever been hit. I don't know, maybe he maintained that even afterwards. I don't remember. I just remember hearing that Rockman.
Yeah, I think he maintained that after, too. Rockman said that Sanders hit him harder than anybody ever did.
Well, yeah, and even if you watch the Vitaly fight, I mean, that's probably the most trouble Vitaly ever had, at least in the first 2-3 rounds, because I think Sanders even stunned Vitaly in the first round because he landed a nice left hand, and I mean, he wasn't reeling, and well, he actually did fall, but it wasn't the direct result of a punch. But yeah, Sanders could fight.
Damn, I didn't know this. Corey Sanders lost to Nate Tubbs.
Wow. When was that? Like early 1990s?
94. And the sad thing is, I'm friends with Nate Tubbs and didn't even realize it. I knew he was a boxer, but I never looked at his record. Hell,
did he get knocked out?
No. Nate Tubbs knocked out Corey Sanders. That was early in Sanders' career.
Yeah, that's what I asked. I asked if Sanders got knocked out.
Sanders had a decent record at that time, though. But I don't remember being too impressed with Sanders until about the time he beat the hell out of Bobby Ches, because I always like it when people beat the hell out of Bobby Ches. Now I feel sorry for Bobby, though. All right, so what would you like to see Wilder do next, William? Yeah. Did we lose William?
I don't know. Did we?
I don't know. Did you scare him off like you do everybody else? Jeez.
I know. It's my confrontational attitude.
It is. We've been pretty mellow tonight, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I don't know where he went.
I'm calling him back.
Okay.
You could keep talking.
Hello?
Hey, what's up, William? I don't know what happened there, but.
Yeah, me neither.
All right, so let's go ahead and wrap this up with this. Where would you like to see the heavyweight division go from here? Who would you like to see Wilder fight next? Joshua, Fury? Because I don't know about you, but I don't really want to see Tom Schwartz and Andy Ruiz and Dominic Brazil against these guys.
Yeah, those are the fights I didn't want to see. Like, if Wilder can't get Joshua, I want that fight the most. I think Fury and Wilder probably won't happen soon. But if Wilder can't get, if he can't get AJ, then I think he should fight White because White, he's been running his mouth for a long time, and I feel like maybe you got to respond to this guy. And then he feels like he should have been a mandatory. And obviously, since he just beat one, he won't have to fight one. But if you could take a voluntary defense, then you take it against White if you can't get Joshua. Now, obviously, if Joshua is saying that he presents a contract that everybody feels fair to, then you go for that fight because you don't want to be in a situation where you take a fight and you're like, man, I end up losing. Because I think that was the biggest issue I had with Vlad too, when Wilder first won the title. I remember you saying Wilder should build his profile, but I'm like, dude, you should fight him. If you feel like you can beat him now, go for it now because you have a chance to become undisputed. And then he didn't take the fight, and then he ended up losing to Fury. And then obviously the rest is history. But I'm like, man, you had a chance for undisputed, and Triple G, I think, was the same way. He didn't fight Saunders, and he didn't get the belt, and then he had a mandatory.
Why would he fight Saunders for a belt Saunders won against nobody?
No, remember when he had the WBO at once? I mean, just as far as, like, getting undisputed.
Yeah,
like,
who gives a shit about that? I mean, the deal is to be the man. Sal Canelo Alvarez is the middleweight champion now, whether I like it or not, because I still think Triple G won the first fight. I think he squeaked out the second fight. But Canelo's the middleweight champion. There's nobody in the world that thinks Dennis Andrade is even in the same class as Canelo. He's done nothing to prove that he was. He's not the champion. There's no reason for him to fight.
No, I mean, when Saunders was the champion, when he had the WBO, I'm saying Triple G should have fought him then. Instead of fighting Canelo the first time, I think he should have went for Saunders. And if you fight Saunders and you beat him, then obviously Canelo
then he's
might
not the
still
champion
be
because he's still got to beat Canelo because Canelo, was the champion.
No, I'm talking about when Triple G still had the belts though. Because remember he had 3 of the belts, and the only person that had the last one was Saunders. So I'm saying fight Saunders, beat Saunders, and then fight Canelo. Because maybe you still have to not take as much money, but I think he would have been closer to getting the split that he would have wanted. And then I feel like even if you beat Saunders and then the exact same thing happens with Canelo the first 2 fights, then maybe, okay, you can still say, okay, I was the man. Canelo eventually screwed me over the first fight, and then he beat me the second fight. You can say that, but it would be much different, like looking at it like, man, I could have had all of the titles. And I don't think it was that super meaningful to beat Saunders, but I think if you have a chance to do it, then I feel like why not go for it?
Because you don't get paid as much?
Obviously that's the case too. And I mean, I felt like the same way when Mayweather Pacquiao happened. When they had 3 of the belts, I felt Mayweather should have fought Kell Brook instead of fighting Berto. Now, obviously, I think the WBA didn't give him his belt. Either they said he didn't pay his sanctions. Whatever happened, I think he didn't get one of the belts. So it didn't matter as much to him. But I think if he would have got 3 of the belts, then go to the UK if you have to and fight Kell Brook because it would have been a better fight than Berto anyway. And if you beat Berto, then you get to retire undisputed at 147.
All right, but this is the thing. Billy Joe Saunders won the WBO title against Andy Lee, if I remember right. Number one, the WBO title didn't even count. They started the WBO title to make all the Brits think they had world champions. It's an illegitimate title. Nobody even recognized it till about 10 years ago. And it's a joke. I mean, it's bought and paid for like all the other ones. Billy Joe Saunders had no claim to be the champion. He beat Chris Eubank Jr. in a close fight, and then he beats Andy Lee. He defends against Akavov, Willie Monroe, David Lemieux. I mean, come on. Who the fuck is Billy Joe Saunders? This is the thing. We just talked about what we need is less belts or 1 belt. At most 2 belts, you said. So why? This is the thing. The only way that, but when you sit there and you say, well, he should have tried to get that 4th belt after we just talked about how these fighters need to make a stand and stop falling for this shit and paying all these sanctioning fees, you still go back to the same thing because it's cyclical for most boxing fans under the age of 40 because they don't understand what I'm trying to say because I saw it when most divisions had an undisputed champion. Even though, there was 2 belts, they'd unify it. And you're only supposed to have one champion. And the thing is, you lose people that aren't boxing fans, as Jeremiah's put it earlier, because they don't even know who the champion is. And there is not a sport in this world where you don't know who the best is, except for this one. And to me, if Joshua fights Wilder, the winner's not the heavyweight champion. The winner will be when they fight Tyson Fury. The 3 guys have to settle this between the 3 of them, unless one of them gets knocked off beforehand.
I do agree with that, but I do think that Fury failing for cocaine and the other stuff, I think that does put him at the back of the line to where he has to be one of them. Like, I mean, it should.
It didn't,
but he's ranked number 2.
He's ranked number 2.
He's ranked number 2.
I agree with that, but I feel like you can't use drugs and then get to be at the same position that you were in.
But they let Canelo.
Exactly. Canelo shouldn't have got a shot like that after that happened.
But if you're going to let Canelo do it, there's a precedent. Why are you going to stop anybody else? Is it going to come to the point where we'll punish the Povetkins and the Furies? If Fury was punished, it was kind of a bullshit punishment, but it's still a punishment. And the thing is this, Anthony Joshua uses PEDs, Deontay Wilder uses them, because all these guys use them. There's not an athlete in any sport that ain't using them, William. And they don't test them to find out. And if they do test them, it's not on an up-and-up way. Do you really think that VADA's caught 3% of boxers using some kind of PED because only 3% are using them?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say. Well, the other thing, too, is everybody's using them, then it is an even playing field here. Like, it's one thing.
That's my point, William. You're the one that wanted to punish him.
Well, no, I'm saying the cocaine. I'm not talking about the PED.
I don't think the cocaine is really a performance enhancer.
I don't think it is, too.
Unless you're Lawrence Taylor.
Was in the 70s and you're a baseball player.
It was for Lawrence Taylor.
Yeah, I mean.
I think the baseball players were more to speed. They kind of got. I don't think they were using cocaine during the games, were they? I don't know. They had the drug trial in Pittsburgh. I'll have to look that up. I don't remember.
And I think that's even worse. Like, you taking something that's not going to boost your performance, that's still going to get you banned from the sport.
Well, it boosts his performance in another way.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, I've never used it yet.
Then how do you know it's definitely true?
Yeah, come on, William.
Well, I don't use none of that. I'm just agreeing with what you said.
One of William's friends told him about it. Jeremiah, leave William alone.
The other thing, too, is you saying it boosts stuff. So how do you know? I'm just agreeing with you.
That's kind of what I want to know how you both know, because you noticed I ain't said a fucking word during this whole conversation.
I don't know. I don't mess with that powder or any of that stuff. But, I mean, it's a ridiculous situation. Like, ultimately, I want all 3 of them to fight. Like, they have to fight. That it definitely has to happen. Like,
hey, you talked about wrestling. You think we could just throw all 3 of them in the ring at the same time, and whoever's left standing wins?
Yeah, a triple threat match.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel sorry. I feel sorry for the situation White's in, but I'm like, dude, if they trying to unify and all of that, then you gotta wait. I mean, it don't sound fair, but I feel like if you have a Wilder Joshua fight and then a Wilder Fury or AJ or whoever wins that next, I'm like, if you wait, you gotta wait, dude. Like,
well, this is the thing. White's got to wait in that case because he had a shot and he lost to Joshua.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and let me go back to something real quick. Is that we're talking about all the the alphabet trinkets and Golovkin not fighting Saunders for the WBO. This is the problem. Okay, I reiterate this a lot, and I find myself broken record, and I hope people understand this after me repeating myself so long. But so here's the thing, okay? This is the problem with the sport. I mean, so the Wilder and Joshua situation and the Golovkin and Canelo situation can highlight this. So let's imagine that Golovkin had fought Billy Joe Saunders before he fought Canelo Alvarez, and he held all of the belts. Do you know what? He's still not the champion. because Canelo Alvarez was the champion. He beat Cotto, who beat Sergio Martinez, who beat Kelly Pavlik, who beat Jermaine Taylor, who beat Bernard Hopkins. So that's a perfect example of why the sport is not in a place it should be, because Golovkin could have held all 4 Alphabet Soup Organization titles, and he would not have been the middleweight champion of the world. It just wouldn't have been the case.
Okay. I agree with you in that case.
Well, and it won't be the case if Wilder and Joshua fight either, because think of this. So if you look at the Ring magazine and you look at transnational boxing rankings, Tyson Fury is number 2 in the rankings. Wilder is number 3. So if Wilder and Joshua fight, that will not crown a new champion. Somebody will hold all the alphabet.
Fury Joshua fighting would crown a new champion.
Exactly. Or if Wilder and Fury fight beforehand, and I don't know if Wilder wins or Fury wins, it doesn't matter. But until you get the number 1 and number 2 guy, it's just kind of a show, man. Again, I understand that these fighters are working within the system and you can't give them a bunch of crap for doing so. This is all they know. A lot of them just aren't that involved in the business side of things, but it just won't make a new heavyweight champion, just as if it wouldn't have made a new middleweight champion had Golovkin beat Billy Joe Saunders.
Well, the thing that did hurt to me Canelo was the fact that he vacated the belt. And then, yes, he did.
But that was a WBC belt. But that was the WBC.
Yeah, that's definitely true. But I will say, if he won all the belts, and then let's just say he gets credit for beating Canelo the first time, and then Canelo beats him, at that point, the person that won that fight would be the man at that point. If Triple G beat him in the first, and
Triple G would have been the man if he'd have beat him in the first fight, and he did beat him in the first fight.
I mean, he didn't get credit for it. So, I mean, it is what it is, and then he lost the second fight. So I think that's the thing that ultimately I felt like hurt him. So, I mean, not like in a super huge way, but I think he could have. I think he had a chance to be the man and to have all the belts.
William, so can I ask you something just real quick, because again, I understand. I really do understand what you're saying. I mean, we wouldn't have had a bigger mess than what we have now, right? Like, Demetrius Andrade now holds an alphabet trinket, and he's viewed as being part of the picture. But here's my thing is, yes, Golovkin could have went that route and fought Billy Joe Saunders, but isn't it a bigger tragedy? Maybe you don't think so. I just want to know your opinion. Isn't it a bigger problem that Golovkin didn't get his shot many years before Canelo Alvarez was even, technically a 160-pounder? I mean, because Golovkin was rated number 1 for 4 years before he even got a shot at Canelo Alvarez. I mean, should the number 1 guy be put off for nearly half a decade before they get a shot? I mean,
well,
this
Canelo
is
fought fights that weren't even in that weight class.
Yeah, that was the thing. That was kind of some golden boy BS, because wasn't Triple G the mandatory for Martinez then, or was it Cotto? I knew he was the mandatory.
So he was the mandatory for Cotto at a time, and then he got step-aside money, and then, I mean, it wouldn't have mattered anyways, because the WBC was going to let Canelo Alvarez and Miguel Cotto fight. Honestly, it didn't matter. If Golovkin would have said, hey, I want the fight, it wouldn't have mattered, because, again, it's all politics. The WBC has been in bed with Canelo Alvarez for many, many years. That's why that's why they're jerking him off right now. That's why Mauricio Suleiman named him a quote-unquote franchise champion. That's why they let him get a soft touch to win his first belt ever when he fought Matthew Hatton, Ricky Hatton's brother, who was not a world-class operator and who had never fought at 154 before that fight. So, again, it's all politics, but Golovkin became the number 1 guy, and it took 4 years before he got the shot. I mean, is it fair that Sergio Martinez I mean, he could have been number 1 far before that. I already highlighted this in an article. But anyways, he was stepped aside by Sergio Martinez, Miguel Cotto, and then Canelo Alvarez for 4 years. I mean, that just shouldn't be happening in the sport. That's why I think we need a single governing body to enforce this kind of stuff, because it happens too much. I mean, look at Guillermo Rigondeaux, right? Rigondeaux, he got because of politics, he couldn't fight Carl Frampton when he was at 122, couldn't fight Leo Santa Cruz. I mean, it happens time and time again. Many of these guys are screwed out of big paydays and legacy because of the political machinations.
Well, and the way
That
this is
definitely
going,
hurts.
guys, we're not going to have to worry about fighters making a ton of money, 10 years from now, the way this is headed.
Yeah, it'll be a real regional sport.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that definitely hurts. And I think that a similar situation happened to Ortiz, too. We took that step-aside money when AJ and Vlad fought. Like, sometimes it's hard to say whether you should not take the step-aside money. Because, Ortiz took it, Triple G took it. And it's like, how much is the money? Is it worth taking the step-aside? Is it worth it to try to fight for that title shot? And sometimes you don't. Like in Ortiz's case, he ended up testing for the drug and stuff, so he never got the shot against AJ. And maybe the same thing could have happened to Triple G. And then maybe we're in a situation. We're in a situation where we never see Triple G get a fight. Like, it's really bad when people get screwed over. I think that's the thing that's the worst part of boxing sometimes is the politics will get in the way of situations. And I think that's the thing that hurts the most is, obviously you want to have one sanctioning body. Now, I do think the one issue that you could have with the sanctioning body is that sanctioning body could be corrupt. They could be doing the same thing the WBC is doing.
Yeah, but that's no excuse to not have one champion because let's face it, the NCAA is the most corrupt institution outside of Congress in this country.
Oh, yeah, they're super dirty.
Yeah, they're as dirty as it possibly gets. So if you've only got one champion, though, no matter how dirty they are, Joshua and Wilder would fight because they would demand it because whichever one is not the champion is going to do it. He's going to take short money. I remember 70s, 80s, we talked about, Wilder could have had this fight 2 years ago taking $10 or $12 million. If he'd have done that and won, right now, he may be huge as hell. But he didn't. And the thing is this, sometimes you just got to bite the bullet, especially if you're sure you're going to win, because that rematch then, you're the one that holds all the cards from then on out. And the problem is, nobody's willing to take the risk of the short money, so nobody really wants to bet on themselves.
Well, here's the issue, too, though, is we could say the same thing about Pacquiao. Should he have taken the $40 million flat when Mayweather offered that? Like, it sounded like a good amount at the time. But, compared to the $100+ million he made when they did fight, like, obviously we didn't.
Yeah, but when was that $40 million offered to him? In 2010 or 11?
Yeah, something like that.
Well, there's the case to be made that $40 million, and that was a lot better version of Pacquiao back then. I'm not saying he beats Mayweather, but I think you get a lot more competitive fight, and it probably leads to a rematch that's going to make him at least another 70 or 80 million. Hell, then you made more.
Yeah.
And he would have had a better chance to win the fight.
Yeah, I think that flat fee probably killed the deal, though. Like, 'cause there's no way you let Mayweather take 100 of that and then get all the pay-per-view proceeds, and then you take.
I don't know. I think if anybody offered me $40 million and they were getting 100, I'd fight them in a heartbeat.
Well, no, yeah, but nobody's going to take that if you're Manny Pacquiao and we're talking about pay-per-view buys. You've got to get a cut of that if you're Manny Pacquiao.
You can't.
Some guys. Yeah, certain guys, it's complex, and this is why I'm not on the business side of things. But if you're Manny Pacquiao and you're an icon of a nation, yeah, you don't take a flat fee and say no. You get screwed out of all the pay-per-view buys.
If you're Deontay Wilder or Anthony Joshua, you don't have that leg to stand on. I don't think.
Well, yeah, it's definitely different there. Not only that, with Mayweather and Pacquiao too, Bob Arum was an impediment, right? Mayweather did not like Arum. He had to break up with him. So, there was that added element to it as well. But, yeah, it's different for different people. Sometimes it is best to take the short money. In fact, it happens all the time. Guys take the short money all the time. Look at. Some guys will give up a bigger percentage of their purse just to try and get something.
How about this? This is a perfect example of this. Larry Holmes and Jerry Cooney. It's a 50-50 split. Holmes had been the champion for 5 years. Cooney was the number one contender. He was hugely popular. He'd scored a couple huge knockout wins. And to get the fight done, Larry Holmes took 50-50. And if you watch that fight, Larry Holmes, Jerry Cooney was introduced last, like he was the champion. And Larry Holmes let it go. And then Larry Holmes beat him. And then, Larry Holmes fought a bunch of guys that weren't worth a shit the rest of his career for the next 3 years. But I think it's because he was pissed off because he had to get 50-50 with a guy that only had 25 fights. So, I mean, right there, if Holmes doesn't go ahead and agree to 50-50, that fight never happens.
Oh, I agree with that 1,000%. Like, I think sometimes all the money issues are sometimes like a huge, huge thing, and sometimes you want to just take the quick fight. But, I mean, I guess you might have situations where you look at Joe Louis's first title shot against Braddock, where they had something set up where they would get a portion of every.
Yeah, Braddock got, was it 10% of all of his purses the rest of his career, Jeremiah?
Yeah, I was like, what kind of slave contract is that? Like, that was just like, oh.
Yeah, but Joe Louis wanted a title shot. James J. Braddock, since he beat Max Baer, held that title hostage for 2 years and didn't defend it against anybody because he was waiting to cash out on one big fight. And he got that with Joe Louis, and it sucks if you're Joe Louis, but you got to get the title shot.
Like, I agree with you. I would agree with you if Joe Louis did not end his career broke.
Yeah, but he ended his career broke because the United States government is basically stealing money from us through tax. Taxation is theft. I mean, and the thing was this. What they got him on, William, if you've read about this or seen it, was the free events where he donated his purse, like for the second Khan fight, to the United States government in a war effort. And then they came back and busted him because he didn't pay taxes on the money he gave to them.
Yeah, that's some super shady bit. I mean, I just think
without that, Joe Louis would have been fine.
Well, didn't he have but didn't he have some issues with women too? I mean, didn't he have a couple breakups?
Who doesn't? Who doesn't, Jeremiah?
Well, but that'll fuck you financially too.
Yes, it will.
I mean, I'm just saying if you take that 10% that he didn't get from every fight, from that fight going forward, he could have been. I mean, even with the taxation, well, he might not have been super rich or anything.
But he ended up owing them like $3 or $4 million. That's a shitload of money back in those days.
Yeah.
So even at 10%, I don't know. But the problem is this. This is the reason he took that fight, because if you remember, Max Schmeling had beaten Joe Louis. So if Max Schmeling, who was the number one contender, got the fight against Braddock and beat Braddock, then the fear, and I think it's a well-founded fear, was Hitler pulls Schmeling back to Germany and holds the damn thing hostage for the next 6 years, and Louis never gets a shot to fight for the title.
That's true. I definitely, like, the thing is, it's like, you kind of can never know which of those situations was the best in that situation, because we can't go back in history and say this could have happened.
Yeah, but if you look at that, I think that, I mean, Joe Louis may not have won a heavyweight championship till 1946 or 47.
That's definitely true. That's the reason that that's the reason I do agree with the decision that he made, because obviously it was one that definitely paid off for him. I'm just saying that it's like, I think when you haven't made a decision yet, then I think you could look at it more, because once you've made a decision, you have to live by it. Like, you can't go back and change it. But, I mean, if you're in a situation where you're like, okay, Pacquiao, he didn't take the 40 million flat, or Wilder didn't take the 15 million flat. And then sometimes you think, like, okay, well, you don't want it to go too long, or one of y'all gets older, or one of y'all loses.
Yeah, which is what happened. They both got older.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing the sad part, too, is I think if you take away the Bradley loss and you take away the mark, I think that fight probably is bigger than it was. Because the thing is, like, Pacquiao, people were like, oh, he slowed down a little. But any point, let's just say, either instead of him not taking the losses, if they fought before the Bradley loss, then I think the fight could be just, I think financially it would have been just as big, but you would have had better versions of both of them. No, I think the result would still be the same, but I think...
Dude, I'll tell you, William, you know what I think the result was? I think the result was those two guys making a pact to not get hurt and making a ton of money.
Well, Well, the thing with those two styles is, if Pacquiao's winning the fight, you'll know he's winning the fight because he'll be landing and he'll be at the pace he wants to fight. And whenever Mayweather's winning fights, the person that's supposed to be good, they're never fighting at their pace. That's usually the thing I notice almost in every one of, because Pacquiao has a certain style, he wants to throw a certain amount, and Mayweather's going to be like, I'm going to keep you throwing 300 or 400 punches, I'm going to throw around that same amount, maybe a little less. But if Pacquiao's throwing 600 or 700 in that fight, you're like, okay, Pacquiao might be winning because he's doing something to open up his offense, and maybe Mayweather doesn't throw enough.
Hey,
And I
William,
think that was always,
as much money as they made, the only people that won in that fight were those two, and the only people that lost were the ones that were watching it.
oh, I mean, I do like tactical fights. I mean, I love the slug.
But that
like,
wasn't a
the thing
tactical
about-
fight. You know what? This is the thing. Watch Leonard and Hearns. That was a tactical fight. It ended violently.
Well, both of them were in their 20s and really didn't know that fear. Like, they hadn't been knocked out or anything like that. And, I mean, Mayweather's...
What? Yeah, but
I mean,
Hearns, when he fought Hagler, already knew the fear of getting knocked out, but he still ran out there and went after Hagler. The problem is this. Manny Pacquiao, great fighter. Floyd Mayweather, great fighter. But they're not willing to take that risk.
Well, I think Hearns should not have taken that risk. Like, the way he fought him, like, my dad was, like, the biggest Thomas Hearns. He's like, man, that was a great fight. I'm like, Dad, that was not a great
Yeah, but yes,
plan
it
by
was,
Hearns.
because this is the thing. Thomas Hearns, if he'd have went 15 rounds and tried to box Hagler, Hagler would have knocked his ass out anyways. Because the thing is this, people think that Hagler couldn't cut the ring off and stuff because Sugar Ray Leonard did that to him, but they don't realize the Marvin Hagler that fought Tommy Hearns was in his prime, and his ass would track you down. And that's why Sugar Ray Leonard wasn't fighting him in 1982 or 83. It's why he waited till after John Mugabe showed that he was getting older.
Oh, no, I'm not disagreeing with that point. What I'm saying is you coming out in the first round having a shootout, you are not fighting at a pace that's comfortable for you. You're fighting at a pace that's comfortable for Hagler. That's why I felt that he was always going to lose fighting that way. That's what I'm like, man, like, what's he doing?
I think
like,
he was losing either way.
I think every pace was comfortable for Hagler.
Every pace was comfortable for Hagler, and the thing is this. Hearns was going to lose the fight anyways, but Thomas Hearns in that loss did more than every win he ever had for the legend of Tommy Hearns.
I mean, that might be true. I mean, I just feel like for him, you might have been better losing in the ninth round than breaking your hand and not even being clearly effective. And then you end up losing because it felt like he never fought comfortable. Like, thing I always look for as a fighter, whatever your style, whether it's exciting, whether it's boring, whatever, dictate your pace. And I felt like Hearns didn't do that.
Yeah, but this is the thing. Marvin Hagler fought a lot of good fighters from 1975 to 85. It's really hard to find one that got to fight at their own pace because Hagler did not allow it. And when you had, I think we had a conversation about who was greater, Hagler or Marvin Hagler would have killed Bernard Hopkins. There's nothing Bernard Hopkins could have done to fight off Marvin Hagler. You go watch Hagler against a guy like Benny Briscoe, Marvin Hagler, or Tommy Hearns, even Roberto Duran. People give him crap for that, but that was one of the nights Roberto Duran showed up. And you can ask Sugar Ray Leonard, when Roberto Duran was prepared to fight, you were going to have issues. He's one of the greatest fighters that ever lived. That was Hagler's first really big fight on a big stage. But if you watch it, there's not too many guys that ever fought at a comfortable pace. And if you watch Duran in that fight, even though he was in the fight somewhat, he never looked comfortable. He always looked like he was getting ready to get the hell out of the way.
Yeah, like I don't fault Hagler. What I'm saying is with Hearns, I'm like, the way you fought clearly. The thing is, I think in the third round he did try to box him, but you had already broken your hand. Like you had already set a pace.
Yeah.
That wasn't comfortable. I'm like, make the man chase you. Don't go straight at him. Like
because you're not knocking Marvin Hagler out no matter who you are.
That was the mind. I'm like, you're not knocking him out. And he thought, like, to me, he came in there like he thought Hagler was soft. Like he was like, I might just knock him. I'm like, what, dude, really? Like, do you not see what this dude has? Good defense. He can take a punch. Like, he came in there like he was just fighting another 147 pounder. Like, man, I'm about to just bust his face off. I'm like, that's not about to happen.
But all right, guys, let's go ahead and wrap this up. We'll have you back again sometime, William. We appreciate you coming on. Jeremiah, you got any final thoughts?
No, I mean, if you don't want to touch on this day, I suppose we could wrap it up.
No, we're like an hour and 35 minutes in.
I know, well, okay, then just give me the last word. I'll take it because
I just tried to give you the last word and you told me no, but go ahead.
Okay, well, I do want to take it then since you'll roll out the red carpet for me.
And I love the Bobby Chacon, Danny Little Red Lopez.
Oh my God, dude, I watched it. I actually got my kids to bed.
You've never seen it before?
No, I watched it tonight.
Really? You've never seen that? Have you ever seen that fight, William?
I don't think I have. I'll
Go
definitely
Google
check it out.
Go Google it. You want to see Hagler Hearns for 7 rounds, and more competitive than Hagler Hearns. Bobby Chacon and Danny Little Red Lopez. Go ahead, Jeremiah. Talk about it.
All right, I'll definitely.
Yeah, so it was the first time that I had seen that fight. I mean, I'd already known Danny. I already had impressions of both guys going in. I mean, Lopez is viewed as one of the bigger punchers at 126, and Chacon was obviously a warrior. Man, I really like that fight. I mean, I sound like you. It seems like more and more because we're like, man, just a different breed of fighter.
I know
these guys were throwing a bunch
of punches.
Hey, how
about this? This is a fight nobody talks about, but you need to go check out Bobby Chacon and Art Frias too. But go ahead.
Cool. Yeah. Frias is also the guy who fought Mancini, right?
Yeah, which is a great fight. Also, check out all his fights with Rafael Bazooka Lamone and Cornelius Bozet. Basically, anything Bobby Chacon fought in, William, go watch it. It's good shit.
Yeah, man. Yeah, but I watched the fight. And I was impressed. I mean, so Danny Lopez, to me, he threw good punches from time to time. Again, he wasn't always consistent because he wasn't that fast with his hands. But Jesus, Chacon was Lopez was landing shots. He was throwing a ton. Both of them were throwing a ton. But Lopez could not get out of the way of that Chacon right hand. I mean, he was landing that thing over and over and over again. And Lopez, I found, did something interesting where he would throw a combination and then he would throw a jab afterwards. And I just thought it was interesting because you don't see a lot of guys do that anymore. But Lopez kept trying to get it. Chacon stood in front of him. He would give him angles. I mean, you could tell that these guys are old school compared to most of the guys today. I mean, they were almost always leading with a jab. They threw punches just about every second of the entire fight. It was competitive. They both landed hard shots. But Chacon was really doing the damage, right? I mean, he was landing that right hand consistently. He was doing a good job of evading Lopez's right hand and his left hook. There were a couple times there where he would lean on the ropes and let Lopez unleash, but he was doing a good job of being, subtly slick. I mean, every once in a while Lopez would catch him with a good hard shot, but it was really Chacon who was doing the damage with that right hand. Lopez just couldn't get out of the way of it. And then the opening of the 9th round,
where he runs out to him.
Oh, yeah, and he cracks him with the right hand, and Lopez you could see that he was stunned. Actually, Lopez had been stunned, I think, about 2-3 other times prior to that. But, yeah, Chacon landed that big right hand and then landed like 2 more right after it and then just started pummeling him on the ropes. He fell, he gets back up, and then Chacon just starts beating him up again. I mean, fun fight, man. And Chacon, subtle skills. He was a fun fighter, and his defense wasn't always great.
He's underrated, though, because, I mean, he was kind of a guy, like, we've seen Arturo Gatti box before, but for some reason, he'd go in every fight with the intention of boxing, but as soon as there's a little bit of blood, his ass was going to stand there and fight.
Yeah, that's what they said in the first round, too, because they were the commentator, I can't remember who the name was, but he got cracked, I think, with a left hook or a right hand from Lopez. And then the commentator, again, this was like midway through the first round, he was like, well, Chacon's game plan of boxing is pretty much out the window now, and he decided to fight, and he got the best of him. I mean, I thought it was a damn good performance by Chacon. I thought he clearly won, I think, every round but about 1 or 2.
But they were close. They were competitive.
They were competitive. Again, Lopez was just so open for that straight right hand. I mean, he was taking him like he was a tough guy, but he was just much too open for it. Again, Chacon was just landing the cleaner, harder shots, but fun fight.
Yeah, and they fought that at the LA Sports Arena, didn't they?
I believe that's what.
And they they sold out with like 17,000 people, and they ended up setting up closed circuit TV down the street or a few blocks away at the Olympic Auditorium, and they had another 3,000 people in there that paid to see it on closed circuit that couldn't get into the fight because they were standing in line for like 24 hours. But that was, I think the big difference there, Jeremiah, was Bobby Chacon, I think physically, the way it was built, was just a little bit bigger and a little bit stronger than Lopez. And I think it was proven because you had Chacon go all the way up to challenge Ray Mancini for the lightweight title at 135 pounds, 8-9 years later.
Well, yeah, and to be honest, when I was watching the fight, Lopez, again, I know he wasn't a basic fighter, but he looked more basic compared to Chacon. I mean, Chacon was more fluid. His footwork was quicker. His hands were quicker. He was better at. One thing that I noticed is Lopez was obviously old school, and he was trying to lead with the jab all the time. But Chacon was better at parrying. He was better at slipping. To me, he looked like the better all around fighter in there, and he was just a bit more creative in the way he was doing things. I mean, Danny Lopez would stand upright. Like in the beginning, he was giving him some head movement, but then he just kept trying to parry Chacon's jab, and it just, as quick as it was, and as accurate as he was, it was just popping his head back a lot of times. But Chacon was just, again, he was just more fluid. He had better defense. He was slicker. Again, he was more creative in his shots. To me, again, I'm not that familiar with both of their careers, but Chacon to me
Have you seen Chacon
looked
and
like
Edwards too?
I don't think so.
Oh, really? You got to see that. That's the bloodiest fight in history, and that was the fight where Ferdy Pacheco from the 6th round on is screaming they should stop the fight, and Chacon ends up winning the fight. And that fight was so good, they showed it on NBC Sports World on a Saturday afternoon. They showed it 2 more times that year. I mean, they replayed it because people wanted to see it. I think it was the fight of the year, and I think it was 1982 or 83. And then his fight with Ray Mancini is similar to a lightweight version of Hagler Hearns, where they just stood there, and at one point in the 2nd or 3rd round, him and Mancini are just wailing on each other, just beating the shit out of each other. And if you guys go watch that, you'll see why I talk the way I do. I mean, you watch Burt Cooper and Michael Moore. Burt Cooper and Michael Moore was a heavyweight fight.
Hell yeah. No, I'm with you, man. It's we talked about this. I mean, you look at some of the fights that we're getting nowadays, and Burt Cooper, you look at his record, and you're like, oh, man, this guy is just about 500. The dude could fight when he was on.
Oh, yeah. When he was on, he was like a little Joe Frazier.
Yeah.
I mean, he beat a lot of guys that were pretty good, and he damn near became the heavyweight champion of the world. I mean, he had Holyfield on the canvas. And that was an absolute war. I mean, him and Holyfield went at it. Of course, Holyfield's another one of those guys that had all kind of boxing skill, but once he got hit in the face, it was going to turn into a war. I mean, we're talking about George Foreman, 260 pounds, fighting Evander Holyfield, who I think weighed 208 that night. And Evander Holyfield chose to stand directly in front of him and trade with him, and he won.
Yeah, I want. Yeah, like, what are you doing, Holyfield?
Hey, man, but he stood there and he beat that ass. And, I mean, George Foreman could still crack a son of a bitch back in, too. So, I don't think he didn't hit as good as he did when he was younger, but he was so damn relaxed, he didn't wear out like he did when he was younger either, though.
That's definitely true.
All right.
I think the thing, too, is...
Go ahead.
Now, I was going to say, a lot of times people won't give Holyfield credit for beating Foreman, but they'll give credit to Foreman for beating Moore, who beat Holyfield. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Like, you got to, like, I always didn't like the double standards that sometimes if a fighter's older, when you fight that older guy, it's like a lose-lose. Like, if you lose to him, then it's the worst. But then if
it's the way it's always
beat
been.
them, then it...
But the thing was this. Now, the reason that Holyfield doesn't get as much credit for Foreman is going into that fight, George Foreman's best win was against Jerry Cooney, who'd been out of the ring for 3 years. And, I mean, they called the fight Two Geezers at Caesars. And when you watch that, I mean, leading up to the fight, most people going into Holyfield Foreman didn't really think Foreman had a chance. They didn't really take it seriously. I think when people look back at it now, I think it has to be one of Holyfield's best wins. It's just like Tommy Morrison. If he couldn't fight, he'd have got knocked out by George Foreman, because that was a Foreman in '93 that, Morrison gave him angles. I think George Foreman of 1993 or 1994 would clean the clock of all three of these guys. Because, number one, you can't knock his big ass out. I don't care what you hit him with. You ain't going to knock him out.
I mean, you could. Oh, well, no, he probably like that. Not that
nobody could knock him out.
Yeah.
Him and Muhammad Ali are the two guys that I'm pretty sure couldn't be knocked out.
Well, Foreman was knocked out, but I mean, it was exhaustion. But I mean, shit, in the 8th round, who isn't fatigued a little bit?
And that's Muhammad Ali, and he got hit like 3,000 times in the minute that led up to it. So that was exhaustion.
Yeah.
But I'm talking more about the Foreman of the late 80s, 90s, because he had learned how to control. He was so damn big, and he had a hell of a jab even then.
Oh, yeah. I think the thing that always sometimes was a little bit bothersome was the fact that, like, just being in that situation where it's like, man, like, I can't get the credit that you deserve. And the other thing, too, with Holyfield was, like, I don't know if there was a better time he could have realistically fought him. Like, you can't really say he could have fought him.
Now, that was Foreman at his best in that second career, because he was only 41, 42. We've seen a fair amount of fighters, from Jersey Joe Walcott to Bernard Hopkins, that could fight around that age. So.
Yeah, I mean, like, you can't take credit from Holyfield because he didn't fight the 70s version because he wasn't.
Yeah, but are you saying you don't think he gets credit for it today?
I think sometimes people don't give him credit for it. Like,
I think the people, this is the thing, I think 50% of the American public doesn't give him credit because they were Mike Tyson fans. And they wanted to discredit Evander Holyfield's greatness as much as they could. And when you look at their careers, Mike Tyson doesn't make a pimple on Evander Holyfield's ass. I mean, from the amateurs all the way up through his career, I mean, shit. Evander Holyfield, 24 years after he fought in the Olympics, fought Nikolai Volyev, and I still think he beat Volyev. He would have been the heavy or a portion of the heavyweight champion then.
Wasn't that the 7-foot dog?
Yeah, that was the 7-foot dog. I don't think he threw a punch in the fight against Holyfield. Holyfield threw 2, so I thought Holyfield won. That was a horrible fight.
Yeah.
All right, let's wrap it up, and maybe we just bring you back every Friday night, William, and we'll just ramble on about old times. So you guys' homework is to watch as many Bobby Chacon fights as you can.
Sweet.
All right, guys, we're going to wrap it up. I want to remind everybody you can find our app on iTunes. You can hear us live on Zeno Radio now. We are on Spotify, iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher. Wherever you find sports podcasts, you'll find The Grueling Truth. So for William Pounds, Jeremiah Preisser, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.